Welcome back. Today, you and I are digging into a dark psychological mystery that began on a holiday weekend. Thank you for joining me on this investigation. Your dedication to seeking the truth is what drives these cases forward. Listen. A missing person case like this leaves a deep psychological scar. Lynette Hooker vanished into thin air, and the agonizing silence weighs heavily on her daughter, Carly, her family, and everyone who loved her. When a mother disappears without a trace, the trauma ripples outward, leaving her inner circle trapped in an endless loop of grief and unanswered questions. That is why we must analyze the testimony of those closest to her. Enter Blaine Stevenson, a close friend of the family who witnessed the cracks firsthand. He and his wife met the Hookers sailing in Florida back in 2023. I sat down with him for a raw psychological deep dive that you need to hear. Blaine began as a loyal defender of the husband Brian Hooker. But human behavior reveals the truth. Now, Blaine spots critical inconsistencies in Brian's story about his wife's disappearance. It simply does not add up, and he is going to expose the strange conversations that triggered his suspicion, particularly during their private late-night phone calls. He is deeply frustrated by the agonizing lack of an active physical search for Lynette right now. You will hear his raw assessment shortly. But first, let us examine the psychological crime scene and the backstory for those unfamiliar with the file. Brian and Lynette Hooker lived aboard a sailboat named Soulmate. Originally from Michigan, they were living out their dream sailing the Bahamas. On April 4th, after leaving Hopetown around 7:30 p.m., Brian told investigators that rough waters suddenly caused his wife to tumble off their small dinghy. He claims he then paddled alone to shore. He arrived at Marsh Harbor around 4 a.m. the next morning, claiming he never found his wife. He insisted Lynette fell off in a tragic accident. Bahamian authorities detained him for 5 days, but with no body, they had to let him go. Since then, intense suspicion has built around him, yet he adamantly denies any involvement in his wife's mysterious disappearance. But his behavior raises red flags. He promised to stay and search, then fled the Bahamas immediately. Today, his current whereabouts are completely unknown, though he continues to maintain his innocence from the shadows. His defense attorney aggressively asserts that Brian had zero involvement and loved his missing wife deeply. But the psychological pressure is mounting. The United States Coast Guard has officially stepped in, launching their own active criminal investigation. You and I previously examined that very sailboat in Fort Pierce, Florida, which has now been seized by federal agents. They are conducting a meticulous forensic search of the vessel, treating this strictly as a criminal homicide probe. With an active criminal case, open dark questions swirl around what truly happened to Lynette out on the water. Now let us examine the interview with Blaine. Pay close attention to his psychological assessment of Brian's behavior. This is not a random outsider. This is a close friend who was in direct active communication with him during the critical aftermath of the disappearance. Yes. He will detail his own cognitive shift, explaining how he went from a trusting friend with no reason to doubt to realizing that the narrative he was fed simply did not match basic human psychology. Blaine, I appreciate you sharing your insights today. It is crucial we dissect these details. Let us start from the beginning. How did you first establish a connection with the Hookers? He explained they met while boating in Florida, just as he was starting out while they had recently arrived from Louisiana. They bonded one night in an anchorage, both desperately seeking a safe harbor from an intense incoming storm. This shared vulnerability often fast-tracks a psychological bond, a mutual connection. After briefly parting ways, they reunited in southern Florida, spending extensive time together and solidifying a lasting friendship built on a shared passion for the sea. But how did he perceive their relationship? Blaine observed a symbiotic connection between his wife and Lynette. His own connection with Brian was cordial, though superficial, and lacking any real emotional depth. To Blaine, Brian was simply an experienced mentor, generously sharing his knowledge with a novice. A shared military background provided some common ground, but as the years passed, their actual relationship was maintained largely through the curated lens of social media rather than in-person contact. Then the illusion shattered. How did he learn of the tragedy? It began with a chilling report someone had vanished in the Bahamas. The witness recalled it was either Saturday or Sunday morning. Actually, it was Sunday or Monday when they first heard of a disappearance in the Bahamas. He was visiting family at the time, and they ended up discussing the bizarre news of the missing person and how it could have happened. By 10 p.m., his wife had gone to bed, leaving him and his daughter awake. They were watching television when she suddenly ran in crying, realizing the victim was their friend Lynette. She immediately tried calling the husband Brian, but he did not answer. When Brian finally returned the call, they spoke for a full hour. That became the crucial conversation they secretly recorded. That was the moment the dark reality set in. As analysts, you and I have to wonder what went through his mind as Brian spun his tale. Back home, the witness was frantically sketching maps on a whiteboard, trying to visualize the area. As investigators, we know these local islands can have highly confusing, overlapping names. Locations like Elbow Cay are notorious for having completely intermixed regional names. Listening to the tape, Brian was completely erratic and all over the place. That confusion is exactly why the witness started recording. But they wanted to map out the area to coordinate a digital search group, allowing him to go back and carefully analyze the local tides and currents later to see where she could have drifted. He was simply trying to act as remote tactical support while a friend endured an unimaginable nightmare. So the decision to press record did not actually stem from early suspicion. It was a practical move to document the details, what some might call a marital dispute prevention tool. It prevented arguments later on when they tried to map out exactly where Brian said he departed. Furthermore, as investigators, you and I know that when dealing with a traumatized husband, the rule is to let him speak freely. You do not start by grilling a grieving husband. At that point, there was absolutely no accusation of foul play. Otherwise, an experienced investigator would have asked entirely different questions. The sole focus back then was simply gathering raw data to help aid in the rescue effort. So there was absolutely no suspicion when the tape first began rolling, not at the start of the call. But by the end, everything shifted. What triggered the alarm bells? For the witness, it was the highly inconsistent story about the flares. Specifically, the highly suspicious detail of the life vest remaining inside the dinghy. It was the cold delivery of his words, followed by the shocking confession that they were not wearing any life jackets. While boaters often neglect safety gear, something felt off. Brian then went out of his way to explain they had the required safety vests stowed away, which immediately raised red flags about his state of mind during a crisis. Exactly. Then came another critical contradiction, when Brian claimed the sun had not even set yet. For an experienced coastal resident, that timeline simply did not align with reality. He claimed it instantly became too dark to see her. But when you try to mentally reconstruct this entire sequence of events, like a movie, the physical pieces of Brian's story do not fit together at all. The witness was not explicitly accusing Brian of committing an evil act, as that was not his job. His sole focus was finding Lynette. But the story lacked basic linear logic. Did they ever communicate again after that bizarre phone call? They only texted, and Brian sent those infamous photos circulating online of the supposed incident location. He followed up with a text claiming he had forwarded everything to search and rescue. The witness then paused to verify the exact exchange on his device. He eventually sent a message stating his wife was far too devastated to talk. He requested all future updates go through him instead of his wife. He demanded any progress be directed to him. Brian sent a single photo of a green float found 100 yards south of the dinghy. That was the final contact. But when did their communication officially end forever? April 7th at 8:25 a.m., the trail was already growing cold. What made them cut off communication? Why stop texting him then? By Tuesday the 7th, the clock was ticking. He was arrested Wednesday, forcing them to finally step into the narrative. They released the recording because he could no longer speak for himself. They leaked the audio for one reason: to get search teams into the areas Brian had pointed out. They had no choice. Brian was already behind bars, completely cut off from the outside world. He could not look for Lynette during those critical first 5 days. As investigators, we knew a terrifying possibility existed. She was stranded on an island, dying of dehydration. Even now, the true scale of that search remains a disturbing mystery. As we piece together this timeline, we can see search and rescue teams were active and we respect their effort. To be clear, they only searched for a brief 3 hours that Sunday morning, guided by Brian himself. After that, there is zero record of any official Bahamian search operations ever taking place. If they did search, they kept it completely off the grid. Did the police know something we did not? Is that why they halted the search? Stopping so abruptly makes no sense. The actions of the local police are completely baffling. Nothing fits. Let us be completely fair here. I am on the record stating we should not blame local island authorities when tourists make foolish choices and then complain about the police. I understand how island systems work, but this case is deeply troubling. It has been 5 weeks. Think about this. A journalist had to track down a photo of what the victim was wearing. She was the one who personally delivered that crucial evidence to search and rescue teams. Meanwhile, local authorities already possessed surveillance footage showing her exact outfit, but they never passed it to their own search teams. This is not an issue with foreign agencies. This is a total internal breakdown of communication. As an investigator, I keep coming back to those 5 days they held him for interrogation. Police do not hold a suspect that long without serious leverage. In missing persons cases, you rarely see this unless there is immense suspicion. You and I must wonder, do they know something that makes a physical search completely pointless? If they have that kind of evidence, they need to release it. Right now, the family is stuck dealing with American agencies like the Coast Guard, while the rest of the world is just waiting and hoping for Brian's immediate arrest. But a premature arrest only gives the media closure. It leaves the victim's family completely in the dark. The priority must remain finding her on those islands. We see the family rallying together. They are in absolute agreement that a private search party must be organized immediately. They need official permission to search. From an investigative standpoint, Brian's guilt or innocence is entirely secondary to finding Lynette. Every moment spent building a criminal case is a moment stolen from the search for a missing person. It is a valid point. The emotional toll on loved ones like Carly is immense. We get so hyper-focused on the prime suspect that we forget true resolution is completely impossible without knowing what happened to the victim. Brian is sucking the air out of the room, overshadowing the actual victim who is still out there. The psychological focus must shift. Regardless of how she got there, a human being is still lost in the Bahamas. The family's plea remains simple: let us search. But why did the Bahamians halt the operation? Nobody has answers. My intelligence sources inside the Coast Guard and the media have heard absolutely nothing. The local police have maintained total radio silence, issuing only 3 brief cryptic press releases. First, they announced a missing woman. Second, they arrested Brian. Third, they released him under highly questionable circumstances. As investigators, those 3 bullet points are the only official pieces of data we have managed to secure. And then we face the ultimate mystery. Where is Brian now? Honestly, nobody seems to know. His post-incident behavior shows a radical psychological shift. He is acting like a completely different person. To put it bluntly, his entire psychological presentation now screams deception. Evaluating the profile, I suspect he is no longer even in the country. It is pure speculation, but we have to ask ourselves, where would he go? Did he flee to familiar territory? Unfortunately, the witness did not know him well enough to pinpoint those locations. His military records are unclear, but we confirmed he previously served in the Marines. He was not of the Vietnam generation himself, but his training officers certainly were. His superior officers and sergeants brought that specific mentality. This points us directly towards Southeast Asia. Vietnam has no extradition treaty with the United States, offering a perfect hiding spot for a runaway veteran. While we must avoid pure speculation, we cannot ignore the bizarre timing of him hiring that out-of-state Michigan attorney. Holding a sudden press conference was a highly suspicious move. It was a classic magician's trick, a distraction saying, "Look over here," while he was completely absent from the interview. He never sat beside his lawyer. There was absolutely no legitimate reason to hold a press event for just 3 questions. At that moment, public interest in his case was rapidly fading. Why thrust himself back into the spotlight? Moving his boat, the Soulmate, to Florida was another misdirection, a visual illusion of presence where none existed. That is an incredible amount of money to burn just to stay hidden. Looking back at your interactions with Brian, did you notice any behavioral red flags or strange patterns during your friendship? With the benefit of hindsight, did any of his past statements or actions suddenly strike you as deeply disturbing? Initially, his aggressive social media postings were written off as merely passionate political activism. But looking back at the evidence, a darker undercurrent of genuine rage emerges. While politics can certainly divide people, his hostility was on another level. The witness lives a quiet life at sea, but the suspect was hyper-focused, consistently angry, and increasingly aggressive. This online hostility revealed a darker personality trait that ultimately bled into his real-world actions. As an investigator, I must ask, did you observe any unusual dynamics in his relationship with Lynette? Not in person, though, their subsequent digital interactions did paint a slightly different picture. During double dates, the witness would converse with Brian, while the wives sat talking at the far end of the table. Even when they borrowed the suspect's vehicle, the primary channel of communication remained strictly between the two wives, keeping Brian at a distance. By all accounts, Lynette was a truly wonderful person. The suspect hit the absolute lottery by marrying her, especially for someone pursuing a live-aboard lifestyle. It is a sentiment our witness deeply understood from his own marriage. Lynette was beloved. Now let us dissect his story about the weather. Local maritime experts immediately challenged his alibi, stating his description of the conditions simply does not match reality. Our investigation consulted 3 experienced captains in that boating circle, along with a trusted local homeowner. They all confirmed that the weather did eventually turn severe that night. Understood. This is backed by digital evidence, including a detailed online report detailing the exact storm conditions that evening. Several confidential sources within the local boating community have also quietly stepped forward, confirming that sea conditions deteriorated significantly as the night progressed. However, we must analyze the exact timeline. Security footage and local camera feeds captured the area at the exact moment of the alleged incident. The video evidence clearly shows the sea was still perfectly calm. For our search efforts, we must acknowledge that the storm only hit much later in the night. We are not accusing the witnesses of lying, but the objective surveillance footage cannot be disputed. The storm did arrive, but only hours after the critical window. At the exact hour the suspect claims this tragic incident took place, the water was actually calm and peaceful. Our task now is to reconcile these two timelines and determine the exact minute the weather shifted. To be clear, the meteorology completely refutes his timeline. The conditions do not align with his official statement. He claims to have faced massive 4-foot waves, yet he did not even set sail until nearly 10 o'clock. Simply put, the weather could not have caused Lynette to go over the side. Whether his narrative is a fabricated alibi or a distorted memory, the suspect undoubtedly encountered rough seas at some later point during his late-night journey. What was his actual level of experience as a mariner? Based on your direct observations of him on the water, did he appear competent behind the helm? During our interview, the witness admitted the suspect held far more information. They did not exchange formal sailing credentials, but Brian projected an aura of deep competence. He offered critical tactical advice that, according to the witness, actually saved his life when a violent storm rolled in later on. Brian's guidance was deeply embedded in the witness's mind during the crisis. But when evaluating their relative levels of sailing expertise, the witness couldn't make an accurate psychological or practical assessment. As investigators, we noted his extensive time on the water meant his dinghy handling and crisis reflexes should have been exceptionally sharp. This was crucial. It was certainly not the couple's first time navigating rough seas or dealing with a dinghy emergency. The evaluation was clear. Brian's maritime skills were far above average. We then focused on a critical phone call asking if the suspect exhibited signs of genuine psychological distress. He noted no distress, admitting he was no behavioral expert. We considered the timeline this call occurred Monday morning, 48 hours after the tragic Saturday night incident. Crucially, while secretly recording this conversation, the witness was entirely unaware of the highly suspicious timeline gaps in Brian's story. The witness also lacked context about who was supporting Brian, explaining that his flat tone might simply be the psychological numbing effect of heavy anxiety medication after losing his wife. From an analytical standpoint, the witness refused to overanalyze that tone, citing his own lack of experience with such profound, sudden grief. He simply could not predict how he would react under identical, devastating circumstances. Recognizing this bias, we shifted our focus to behavioral red flags, specifically asking about Brian's relationship with alcohol. Initially, no alarming behaviors were observed. But shortly after their initial meeting, the couple abruptly separated for nearly 2 months. When they finally reconciled the witness's wife, Marn realized that their vessel, soulmate, was anchored just one cove down from them. She immediately suggested they reconnect and meet the couple for dinner. But then came a telling detail. She revealed they had completely stopped drinking. This sudden sobriety sparked a brief social dilemma, weighing whether to drink in front of them or support their recovery. The witness and his wife silently agreed to accommodate them, completely avoiding alcohol whenever they were together. Consequently, during all of their post-reconciliation interactions, both Brian and Lynette appeared to be completely sober. We pressed further, asking if he was aware of the sudden separation. While his wife held the intimate details, the witness only discovered the split through casual talk about which anchorage the couple was using. His wife revealed a text from Lynette stating flatly that she had packed up and left Brian. The witness detached himself psychologically, assuming their boating friendship was over, and choosing not to reach out or pry into Brian's crisis. He chose to keep his distance, offering no words of comfort until his wife delivered another sudden update the couple had officially reunited. His immediate casual response was to suggest a simple dinner date. He remained entirely in the dark about their highly toxic relationship dynamics until the tragedy occurred. We immediately pushed to find out what his wife had actually known about the split. She held the actual text messages. Paraphrasing the texts, the witness described a disturbing psychological picture. Brian's anger had escalated so severely that Lynette flatly refused to ever be trapped alone on a boat with him again. Crucially, the witness remained completely oblivious to this dark history until after his post-incident phone call with the suspect. We needed to establish a timeline, asking for the exact date of those messages. The witness estimated December 2023 or January 2024. This meant they had coexisted for months before the tragedy. Those text exchanges are now widely circulated online. We had already analyzed this digital evidence, though we needed to verify the exact chronological timeline. We pushed for any additional warning signs or domestic disputes leading up to the disappearance, but found none. The witness admitted he eventually unfollowed Brian on social media, overwhelmed by the suspect's increasingly intense political posts. Despite the social media muting, they maintained regular contact, discussing sailing routes to potentially meet up in the Bahamas. They spent hours calculating complex coordinates and comparing routes, a meticulous effort driven purely by their genuine affection for Brian and Lynette as close friends. Ultimately, the witness's boat sailed too far south too quickly, leaving the couple behind in the Bahamas and preventing their paths from crossing. It was a simple logistical miss, rather than any intentional avoidance. This constant focus on Brian's political posting immediately drew our professional attention. Drawing on our own familiarity with the unique live-aboard lifestyle, we knew this highly obsessive behavior clashed sharply with standard boating culture. Typically, the live-aboard boating community is characterized by a relaxed, escapist mentality rather than aggressive, highly polarizing online activism. Such hostile obsession simply failed to align with the psychological profile of a retired sailor enjoying a peaceful life at sea. The witness's final assessment confirmed it. Brian was the most extreme, politically obsessive personality in his entire network. He blamed the political noise, the relentless chaos of the elections, as his reason for tuning out. He claims he hit a breaking point where he simply chose to shut it all out. He insists it was nothing personal, no real disagreement with the man's actual beliefs. But when he tried to engage to offer a different angle, the subject shut him down instantly. It was a classic display of control. The hostility was unyielding. At that point, our witness decided it was safer to back off. Why trade paradise for another man's rage? He chose to look away, focusing on his own peaceful horizon instead of the storm back home. It was a waste of energy. But now, we must ask, what is the next move? The demand is clear. Local authorities must grant full clearance for an exhaustive search operation, deploying elite search teams alongside her desperate family. It is the only path forward. We cannot allow this painful wound to be torn open 5 years from now, because her disappearance remains an unsolved mystery. In our line of work, we know that when a body is never recovered, the psychological torture never stops. For the next 10 years, every single green dry bag recovered from those waters will act as a devastating psychological trigger for his wife and daughters. A constant agonizing urge to rush to the scene. The mission is survival first, answer second, regardless of what forensic evidence is uncovered. They must find her to end this nightmare, protecting a young woman from carrying this heavy trauma for the rest of her days. I want to thank our key contact, Blaine, for his critical insights, and thank you for continuing this investigation with me. I hope you are all staying safe during this holiday weekend. But my recent debriefing with Blaine forced me to analyze a deeply troubling question. Why has the active search for Lynette ground to a complete halt? How is it possible that no one out there is looking for her? How does a human being simply vanish without a trace? It is highly unsettling. How can a family heal when the rest of the world just moves on? While a formal criminal investigation is currently active, her inner circle is desperate for a physical search effort. They are seeking something far deeper than just a police case file. They need, as cliché as it sounds, closure. They need a definitive resolution to this agonizing mystery. I will keep digging. Thank you for standing by me on this case. I will be out in the field this week, pursuing new leads on other active files. I have several disturbing cases currently under investigation. I will update you as soon as more unfolds.